Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. Now it's been nearly 2.5 years since I opened this box and got my hands on my very own Panasonic FZ82. Now in this video I'm going to talk about what I like and what I don't like about this camera. After 2.5 years of use, I've taken over several thousand photographs with the FZ82, used for video, all sorts of other things. So stick around if you're thinking of buying a Panasonic FZ82 or perhaps one of its rivals. Also, you may be contemplating buying a 1-inch sensor bridge camera, which are much more expensive, but can they offer more image quality? Or perhaps you're thinking of going for a DSLR or a mirrorless system and you just want to make sure that it's the right choice for you. So the first point, which I consider a pro, is the fact it has a fixed lens. Now normally that's considered a negative point, however in the case of using this for travel it's a positive, because you've got a camera there with a wide angle lens and a zoom all in one. It's compact size, you're not having to take a separate body and several lenses, and this will fit into your hand luggage, no bother at all. So on to point number 2, and that's another positive for this lens. It goes from 20mm at its widest angle to 1200mm at the full length of the telephoto. Now, few bridge cameras in this price bracket can match the FZ82 in this respect. Image stabilisation. Now, some cameras have pretty average image stabilisation. However, the FZ82 and quite a lot of the other Panasonic models do have indeed an excellent image stabilisation system on board. Without a doubt, the image stabilisation on the Panasonic FZ82 does work best at the wider end of the lens range. However, I have taken some really good shots, nice and sharp, at low speeds, handheld with this camera. So that's number 3 as a plus point for the Panasonic FZ82. Point number 4, the cost. Let's face it, photography is a really expensive hobby, and if you're in the same boat as me, then I don't have a bottomless pit of cash to spend on camera gear. The FZ82 currently retails in the UK for around the £300 mark, which in terms of photographic gear isn't much at all. So we'll move on to some of the benefits of the Panasonic FZ82 and some of the specs that this camera has. So one of the benefits of the Panasonic FZ82 is that it will shoot in RAW mode, and if you're familiar with that, RAW mode will capture all of the details that the sensor picks up and allows you to take all of that data and decide what's important and what's not. Whereas Jpeg only, well, it's a bit like going to a restaurant, ordering a steak, and nobody asks you how you'd like it cooked. It's predetermined. Panasonic has decided what the Jpeg should look like, and that's what you're stuck with. With a RAW file, you can take that into, say, Photoshop or Lightroom or one of the other equivalents, and then play with that image and get the image exactly how you want it, or how you actually saw it on the day you took the photograph. The camera also has what's known as PASM settings, which all DSLRs have, and if you're using this camera as a stepping stone to a DSLR or mirrorless camera, then you can learn how to use these modes and what you can do with them before you graduate to a bigger, better camera. Another one of my favourite features on this camera is the fact that it shoots time lapses really well, and in fact has the software to build the final video in the camera for you. No hassle with 4,000 images and trying to turn those into a movie. It's all done inside the FZ82. So the next thing to consider is the Panasonic FZ82 will shoot in 4K video, and given the fact that this camera is 3-4 year old now, 4K was fantastic then, it still isn't standard on every single bridge camera out there. I think that's another plus for the FZ82. Along with the 4K video, Panasonic also include the 4K photo mode, which means you can shoot a piece of video and then extract images from that video, which means you'll never miss a shot. So one of the other things I quite like about the camera is some of the mode settings in the scene mode. Now, scene modes generally aren't talked about a lot in photography videos. Let's face it, if you're a series photographer, you're going to be using the camera in manual and putting all those settings in yourself. However, this is a budget bridge camera, and one of the things you can't do is to take an image longer than 4 seconds in manual mode. However, if you move the camera into a scene mode and use an ND filter, then you can take really long exposures up to 60 seconds with this camera. Number 6, and speaking of filters, the Panasonic FZ82 has a filter thread on the front of the lens. Now, not all bridge cameras have that facility. So that's pretty much what I like about the Panasonic FZ82. So what don't I like? So the first negative is the image sensor size. Now, any bridge camera that offers a compact body like this with a huge optical zoom, then you've got to consider that something has to give, and in this case it's the fact that the camera's sensor is quite small. The FZ82 is very similar to other bridge cameras. Now that's going to lead to a couple of problems with this camera, and that is the fact that this camera's sensor means that it's going to struggle to operate in low light. Now the obvious answer is to crank up the ISO, however that's going to put more grain in your images, and it's really noticeable above ISO 400. Another point to consider is when I first got this camera, I did try shooting in the IA and IA Plus modes, and I found that the JPEGs the camera produced were particularly disappointing. Now, for me, the best thing you can do is to start using the PASM modes, so either P mode, aperture priority, shutter priority, or full manual with this camera. Once you start using the camera in those modes, it is like a completely different camera altogether. Another negative for me is the fact that the rear screen is fixed. A tiltable screen on this camera would be an absolute godsend. However, there is a little bit of a workaround in the fact that you can use the rather excellent Panasonic Image app, and you could have the camera mounted really low down and you'd be able to see what the camera was seeing using your mobile phone. That said, the touchscreen itself is pretty brilliant, and it is a feature I really enjoy using. You can use it to pinpoint focus, all sorts of other things like that, set menus, all the rest. Really good feature. However, if Panasonic were to upgrade the FZ82 with a tilt or articulating screen, then I think that would be a game changer. So with this next little gripe, I think I'm being slightly unfair given the price point of this camera. However, this camera has no weather sealing, and to be honest, I've absolutely battered this camera. It's been in loads of different hostile environments, dusty areas. I've taken it to all the Canary Islands with me. It's been out in damp weather, it's been out to motorsport events where it's really dusty, and the lack of weather sealing has seen it. I think I've got some dust inside the lens, but you know, in fairness to the camera, it stood up to a hell of a lot of abuse. Again, being able to add an external microphone to this camera would be a boon. However, it's understandable that Panasonic are probably not going to do this on the entry-level bridge camera that they have. Otherwise, why would you buy an FZ330? One other thing I didn't particularly like when I first got the camera was the fact that I had to charge up the battery inside the camera itself. I wasn't used to that, and it didn't go down well. However, I suppose if you're used to a mobile phone, then that's exactly what you would do. There is a solution to that, and that's to pick up an aftermarket battery charger and some, you might as well get spare batteries at the same time. And I did do a video called my Super 6 accessories for the Panasonic FZ82. I'll put a link to that video above now, and check that out. Another problem with the FZ82 is the diopter on the EVF. Now, several people have stuck that in place with glue or with something like blue tack to try and get round it. I just have to remember to adjust it every time. It's just a little niggle that this camera has. So we've discussed the pros and cons of the Panasonic FZ82, and I suppose the question is, would I buy a Panasonic FZ82 again? So when I first bought this camera, I wasn't producing vlogs, so the FZ82 was fine for what I was using it for then. However, now my requirements have changed somewhat. If I was looking to move up from my mobile phone and get this as a first camera, then certainly I think you can't touch the FZ82 for the money this camera is priced at. It really is a good little camera. That said, now that I vlog you regularly, then the FZ300 or 330 would probably be the camera of choice because of its weather sealing, the opposable screen, and the fact you can attach an external mic. Okay, so it doesn't have the fantastic zoom range that the FZ82 does, but I think for my current circumstances, then yes, the FZ330 certainly makes more sense. Also on my list would be the Panasonic FZ1000, FZ1002 and FZ2000 bridge cameras, available probably second hand between £300 and £500. You've got to consider one of those. That 1-inch sensor in those cameras would certainly help to alleviate some of the noise and low light issues that you get with the FZ82 or even the FZ330. But strangely, none of those trio of cameras are weather sealed either. If money was no object and I was looking for the ultimate bridge camera, then the Sony RX10 Mark IV takes some beating. A good friend of mine, Dave Fletcher, has just purchased one of those, and it really turned my head. He did take this portrait of me and then printed it out on his Canon printer, and pretty much that's DSLR quality out of a bridge camera. The downside to the Sony, however, is the fact that it was going to cost me one of my kidneys to be able to afford it, so a Panasonic certainly makes more sense. So there you go, those are my thoughts on the FZ82 after 2.5 years of ownership. If you have found this video interesting, then please do give it a thumbs up, helps the channel out an awful lot. And if you are not a subscriber, please consider subscribing to the channel, it helps me out, and you'll get to see more videos using the Panasonic FZ82 in the future. Now, I do have a little bit of a surprise at the end of this video. Recently I was looking online and came across a deal I really couldn't pass up. I have purchased a Panasonic Lumix FZ1000. I managed to get a good deal at a really good price and 0% finance, which made it affordable for me. Now, going forward, that has a lot of features that I was looking for in a camera to upgrade from the FZ82. However, I still think the FZ82 is such a cracking camera. I'm going to be keeping that camera and using that for a lot of things like zoo photography, where you need that extra range on the lens, and I think it's going to come into its own there. Things like that. Certainly doing time lapses help me out when I'm vlogging. Definitely a keeper. So that's my final thought on the FZ82. Definitely a camera that once I've bought it, don't want to pass it up and pass it on to anybody else. I really think it's worth holding on to. Thanks for watching. See you again next time. Bye for now.